So your gut microbiome is located in the large intestine. It's also called the colon. Those are two names for the last part of the GI tract. And what's highlighted here in the colors is the large intestine as it goes up, across, down, and out. And this is where a diverse collection of microbes exist. It's not just bacteria. It is also viruses, parasites, worms, all kinds of organisms. So their job is actually to keep us healthy. And they do a lot for us. So they have a symbiotic relationship with us, which means that we give them a free place to live. And in return, they produce a lot of beneficial molecules for us that are really important in human health. These are things we don't know how to do for ourselves, but our gut microbiome does. And some of these things include like metabolizing nutrients. So for example, these bugs can actually make vitamin B12 for us, okay? They can produce neurotransmitters. These are communication molecules used by the nervous system to communicate what's going on in the body with other more distant parts of the body. So they can be involved, for example, in serotonin production. One of the key roles that they play is that they educate our immune system. The gut microbiome starts developing when we are in utero. And as we have exposures to different things, the gut microbiome starts sort of learning what's safe and what's not safe, what we should attack and what we should leave alone. And this is such a key point in understanding why autoimmunity and MS happen, because this is called immune tolerance. A healthy immune system is tolerant. It can certain things and it will attack the dangerous things. It's when you lose tolerance and the immune system has gotten confused that you may now start attacking your own tissues like myelin, and we have a name for that. It's called MS. The gut microbiome actually plays a really important role in our immune health, and that involves inflammation. How much inflammation should be created? When does it go up? When should it come down? These bugs sort of sit in our large intestine and they're signaling to distant parts of the body what needs to happen. So I can't emphasize enough how important they are. And I always find it so funny, actually, that I didn't even know what a gut microbiome was until all my medical training was done. I didn't get it in medical school back in the early 2000s. I didn't get it in residency. And I actually didn't even learn about it until I got into the world of integrative medicine, functional medicine. It just wasn't part of what we were taught in conventional medicine, but it is actually really important. For every one cell in your body, there are 5 to 10 microorganisms living within you. So there's actually more microbial cells in your body than your own cells. So you can imagine what this superorganism is up to. So your gut microbiome is unique. It's actually like a fingerprint. That's why I put that picture there to help you connect this idea that your microbiome is unique, but it can shift. And it rapidly changes in early life, within maybe even the first 6 months of life. And once you start introducing solids to a child, there's a shift and you start really building that core microbiome. And this, there are certain stages in early human life where we have sort of these big jumps in the microbiome, like kind of getting to another step where it's getting closer to the fingerprint or its core bugs that it's going to consist of throughout life. And so we think by about age 2, maybe age 3, your core microbiome is established. It's unique to you. In fact, there may even be forensic applications of this. There are studies where they put people into different hotel rooms, have them hang out in there for a few hours, and then and then they go in and they swab out the rooms, and they can identify who was in what room based on the microbial bugs they left behind. I mean, isn't that fascinating? So maybe we will stop using fingerprints. This is actually maybe even more specific. And one thing to really appreciate about the microbiome is that it shifts. It's not a static thing. The core of it is maybe static and harder to change, but based on what you're being exposed to, it can shift. For example, when a baby is born via C-section versus naturally, it is going to come in contact with different bugs. As a C-section, you don't go through the vaginal canal and get that exposure. So that has an impact on what your core microbiome might look like. Whether or not you have pets has an impact. Whether I've even seen things like whether or not you wash your dishes in a dishwasher or you hand wash them, that impacts the type of microbes that you are coming in contact with. And by the way, one of the reasons that autoimmune diseases are on the rise is that in the first world, we live in highly sterile environments. You can go run around and pick up a bunch of toxins that are floating out around the environment, like pesticides and herbicides, but it's really hard to pick up these good friendly microorganisms because we clean everything, we bleach everything. And now post-pandemic, let's use the hand sanitizer, let's wash our hands 50 times a day. So we are limiting our immune system's exposure to healthy, ordinary bugs that help fine-tune the immune system. So diversity in the microbiome is really important. You don't want a few different types of microorganisms. You want normal amounts of a lot of different bugs because each microbe does maybe something different and you want all of those functions on board. So diversity is key, and there are things we can do to make our microbiome more diverse. And then something to think about is that I know there's a lot of tests out there that can tell you who's growing in your gut microbiome. You submit a stool sample and then you get the readout of the different species and their relative abundance, how much is present. It's sort of like taking a census of who's present. However, it's maybe not the most telling way of knowing whether or not you have a healthy microbiome or not. It's actually the metabolic activity of your entire microbiome that matters. And we're not quite there yet in a clinical setting to test for the metabolome or the overall metabolic activity of these bugs. And so while those tests, stool tests, can be interesting to know what bugs are there and what is not, it's probably we're not really at the point where we can be very specific. We really need to get to the next level where we're learning how much of this molecule are we making? Is the microbiome putting out enough neurotransmitters? So that's really the key. So I wanted to share this study with you. There's many. This is just one that I pulled. It's a Chinese study. I think they ended up having 50 or 60 patients. What they did was they took the stool of a group of people with MS and then controls, people who did not have MS. And what they found was that the people with the MS had some unique characteristics in their gut microbiome. For example, one of the types of bacteria they found that was low was Faecalibacterium. And this can be actually a really beneficial bacteria to have because it does a lot of useful things for us. These people, because of their diagnosis of MS, were metabolically a little bit different. Certain molecules were produced at different levels. So you were able to differentiate them from the control group that did not have MS. For example, they were producing less butyrate. Butyrate is a molecule that our good bugs produce when we eat fiber, when we eat prebiotic foods. So the prebiotic foods feed the good bacteria and then they produce butyrate for us. Butyrate can protect the brain, and people with MS had lower butyrate levels. They had more of the inflammatory cytokines, which are the molecules used by the immune system to communicate. There's inflammatory cytokines and anti-inflammatory cytokines, and people with MS tended to have more of the inflammatory cytokines like TNF alpha and IL-17. Don't worry about those names. You don't have to memorize anything. They also saw that people with MS had lower anti-inflammatory cytokines, right? So it's like a double whammy. So one of the, big overarching takeaways from their project was that some of the key functional bacteria were altered in people with MS, and that may actually play a pivotal role in the onset, progression, and maybe even remission of MS. Okay, so we know that there's changes in the gut microbiome with MS. This is a very simple example. There are many other examples. This is another study I wanted to share with you. And it's actually not a study, it's a case study. It is about fecal microbiota transplantation. So basically a stool transplant where you take a healthy stool sample from a healthy donor and you give it to someone who has a health condition, and then you look and see if they improve. This is actually used a lot in people who have diarrhea that does not go away with all kinds of antibiotics. There's something called C. diff colitis, and stool transplants are actually an approved therapy for that. So here's what happened. This is just 3 case studies. This is not a big study. 3 different people. Fecal microbiota transplants were done for GI issues. These people had either like constipation, diarrhea, or some kind of inflammatory condition. Not only did they have improvement in their GI issues, and they had somewhere between 5 to 10 a series of stool transplants. So they did it 5 to 10 times. The GI issues improved. They actually had prolonged improvement in their MS symptoms. Okay. And if you go ahead and look this up, I put the reference down at the bottom. Their walking improved. They were able to stop using their assistive devices, and the effect was long lasting. So they benefited anywhere between 2 to 15 years after that series of stool transplants. Okay. So what does this mean for MS? Should we all run out and ask our doctors for a stool transplant? Well, first of all, this is a series of case studies. They're not telling us about all the people who had the stool transplant and didn't get better. Also, there are some issues associated with stool transplants. Like, in fact, it can actually lead to some inflammatory or autoimmune conditions as well. So this is something you want to definitely be very careful about. And there's very specific reasons right now where we would do stool transplants for people. But clearly, this is showing us that a healthy microbiome may play a really important role in MS. These 3 people actually had pretty profound improvements in their symptoms, not just GI, but also MS.